Okay, good morning, everyone. We are here on July 11th, our season finale of weekly Rip from the Headlines classes. Stay tuned for special programming, but I would imagine many of you are familiar with the fact that, the way the TV schedule used to work, that there would be the season of about 30 episodes, and then in the summer they can go to reruns. So these days we don't have to go to reruns in the summer because everything is recorded. And you can just go to my YouTube channel and find all of the classes that we've had there for your perusal. Maybe some of them are worth listening to again. Maybe you missed some during the year, but there may be some special programming and occasional holiday-related classes and the like. But it's been a great season of ripping things from the headlines and approaching them from a Jewish perspective. This morning, we're going to combine two subjects. It's kind of something that built off of something that we saw last time when we were talking about whether or not you can pay or charge for organ donation. This has to do with two things that were in the news lately. This is acceptable risk and conspicuous consumption, visiting the Titanic, and $175 hamburgers. I'm sure everyone followed the submersible that went missing and then ultimately, sadly, had imploded, killing the explorers who were on board, who were trying to visit the Titanic. That was a topic that was definitely in the news for a number of days as we transitioned from June into July. And right around the same time was a headline in the Jewish media about a kosher restaurant in Midtown selling $175 gold-plated burger. So, not everyone may have followed that one, but we're going to look at the headlines, and we're going to look at what some reactions, some responses, and then of course some Jewish responses to this as well. So just starting things off, source number one. The Titan submersible was an accident waiting to happen. This is a summary of the whole saga in the New Yorker. Primary task of a submersible is not to implode. The second is to reach the surface, even if the pilot is unconscious with oxygen to spare. The third is for the occupants to be able to open the hatch once they surface. The fourth is for the submersible to be easy to find through redundant tracking and communication systems in case rescue is required. Only the fifth task is what is ordinarily thought of as the primary one, to transport people into the dark, hostile deep. Now, I don't know about you, but I have zero interest in being stuck in something the size of a minivan going thousands of feet underwater. But the primary task of these submersibles is not to do any of these things. It's to really be safe and get to the surface and be tracked, not necessarily to transport people back and forth. People are so enthralled with the Titanic, OceanGate's founder Stockton Rush told the BBC documentary Fool last year. I read an article that said there are three words in the English language that are known throughout the planet, and that's Coca-Cola, God, and Titanic. Well, there is a certain fascination. I would imagine people are familiar with the movie Titanic. That was a major media sensation when it came out. They play it all the time on the TV, right? The idea of there's something that we're curious as to what it must have been like to be on that ship, to go down with the ship, who were saved and the like, and whether there's a personal connection or not. And this was the person who founded that company that built the submersible and ultimately went down with the ship, that ship, the Titan. Until June 18th, a manned deep ocean submersible had never imploded. But to McCallum, Leahy, and other experts, the OceanGate disaster did not come as a surprise. They've been warning of the submersible's design flaws for more than 5 years, filing complaints to the U.S. government and to OceanGate itself, and pleading with Rush to abandon his aspirations. As they mourned Giolet and the other passengers, they decided to reveal OceanGate's history of knowingly shoddy design and construction. You can't cut corners in the deep, McCallum had told Rush. It's not about being a disruptor, it's about the laws of physics. And so with regard to that episode, what kind of people take these kind of risks? Are these risks considered acceptable? They were clearly acceptable to those who went on it, but is this something that we should be doing? We know it's dangerous, we do it anyway. It's a matter of time. Do we want to be that person who shows up when it's that matter of time? So that's something that we will address. What emerges from this submerging is that it's not really so clear. Just like there's some people who would do this and others who wouldn't, halacha may also have a similarly flexible scale as to what's considered dangerous and what is permissible when it's dangerous or not. Now, just briefly, the other story. Source number 2, dining out in New York City is expensive, especially at a kosher restaurant. But Mocha Burger Lux, a forthcoming Midtown restaurant, is upping the ante with its 24K gold plate golden burger, which has an eye-popping price, $175. The 12-ounce short rib burger is wrapped in leaves of real 24-karat gold. It's grilled and topped with black Australian truffle, crunchy onions and chips, house-made sauces, and pickles. The dish is brought to the table in a custom hand-carved wood treasure chest, which will be opened at the table, triggering a smoke show and illuminating its contents. You're not paying for the piece of meat, proprietor Naftali Al-Benaim told the New Jewish Week. You're paying for the experience. When asked who he thinks will order the new restaurant's 24K gold-plated golden burger, people who want to be seen, Al-Benaim said. We live in a world where everybody wants to be different. Everybody wants to be seen to feel special. Okay, I'm not sure exactly if you have to, feeling special comes from eating a $175 burger, but, is this what we should be spending our money on? Or, when should we be spending significant amounts of money? What's considered, is there something that's considered too ostentatious? Is this something that goes beyond what we should be paying? Does the money have better uses? Or, let's face it, there are certain luxuries or certain things that we like to pamper ourselves. And, how does that play out in terms of what we should be using money on? And in particular, this is something that's, I think, unique in the Orthodox community, and we'll dive into it. We're going to dive into the ostentatious issue and chew on the submersible issue. But when we look into it, it's something that is might be especially noticeable in the Orthodox Jewish community. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we unpack things from a Jewish perspective. So when is dangerous too dangerous? When is a hamburger too expensive? When are things too fancy? Let's dig down into the Jewish sources, but first, any questions or reactions? Of course, we'll probably answer some of them in the sources, but any reactions before we get underway?
Rabbi, do you know how many women died on the Titanic?
No, I don't. Do you?
Yes. I bet nobody else does. One. Incredible. Only one woman died.
Wow. Well, because of women and children first?
I guess so.
All right. I don't know. So I saw some men cutting to the front of the line in the movie, but then again, it's a movie. So let's dive into it. So when it comes to danger, we all immediately think of the fact that we're supposed to nishmartem ma'od lenafshotechem. We're supposed to be worried about our souls. We're supposed to be careful, and that is the source in number 3, Devarim, chapter 4. Pasuk 9 has, take utmost care and watch yourself scrupulously so that you do not forget the things you saw with your own eyes. So that you do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and make them known to your children, to your children's children. Right? This is about continuing the tradition of Judaism. For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when the Lord your God spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. It's linked into a warning or re-emphasizing of the fact that we are bearers of the covenant, that we have to be careful. Since we're passing down the tradition, we have to be careful. And this is how Maimonides understands this, that within the context of being careful so that we can be bearers of the tradition and we can be followers of God's will. Source number 4, Rambam in Deot, the laws of proper behavior. Since maintaining a healthy and sound body is among the ways of God, for one cannot understand or have any knowledge of the Creator if he's ill. Right? You can't do mitzvahs if you're sick in bed. Therefore, you must avoid that which harms the body and accustom himself to that which is helpful and helps the body become stronger. The idea of trying to maintain our health as best as possible so that we can fulfill our mission as Jews. That's really the context of the verses. And so this leads to a whole series of behaviors that must be avoided. we should avoid and we have to be careful not to present to others. The whole life safety rules and regulations. Especially, one famous one is this idea of having a fence on the roof. It's summertime, you have to be careful about, swimming only when there's a lifeguard to make sure kids are not unattended. There are all sorts of rules and regulations within Judaism about being careful. A number of them are found in the Rambam's laws of Rotseach. Rotseach are the laws of murder. And within those laws of murder, it's not how to murder, it's to avoid murder. We have a couple of specifics mentioned. Source number 5. Similarly, it is a positive mitzvah to remove any obstacle that would pose a danger and to be very careful regarding these matters, as Devarim states. If a person leaves a dangerous obstacle and does not remove it, he negates the observance of a positive commandment, and he violates a negative commandment, do not cause blood to be spilled. Right, there's a positive and a negative of being careful for oneself and to impact others. What are some specifics? Our sages forbade many matters because they involve a threat to life. Whenever a person transgresses guidelines, saying, I will risk my life, what does this matter to others? Or I'm not careful about these things, he should be punished by stripes for rebelliousness. Right? You have a crazy, dangerous idea, the rabbi, the Beit Din, should beat the person. What are the types of crazy ideas? These include, a person should not place his mouth over a conduit through which water flows and drink. That sounds like a water fountain. Nor should he drink at night from rivers and lakes, lest he swallow a leech without seeing. Similarly, a person should not drink water that was left uncovered, lest a snake or other poisonous crawling animal might have drunk from them, and as a result, the person would die. So the Rambam presents a couple of situations that seem to have been known to him in cases where people were injured or people died, God forbid. So we see from this that it's a mitzvah to be healthy. It's a mitzvah to take care of oneself. It's a violation to take risk. It's a violation to put other people in risk. And those behaviors are in a way, a sliding scale. They're not necessarily hard, fast rules, these behaviors, because, people, again, that first example, putting your mouth over a conduit through which water flows and drinks. Right, when you use the water fountain, you shouldn't put your mouth on where the spout comes out, but we drink from water fountains. What about the laws of of the uncovered water? Now, you may not want to drink it, but how many of us think it's because a snake came in over the course of the evening? That's not really our concern. So there's a sliding scale of behaviors, but what emerges from the Rambam is a rule not to take risks, not to say, oh, I don't care and I'm going to take risks anyway. This is a violation. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis in the Shulchan Aruch says something similar. One should be careful of all things that cause danger, because danger is stricter than transgressions. And one should be more careful with an uncertain danger than with an uncertain prohibition. This is the expression of the Talmud, Chamira sakanta me'isura. We're more concerned about danger than we are about violating prohibitions. This has a very famous practical application in this particular custom. Anyone know what this is used to? Oh, the certain practice that a lot of people are familiar with, a lot of people are not familiar with. Anyone know where this is invoked? We're worried about danger more than we are about prohibition. So this leads to the practice with regards to, we know, of course, that you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. But there's also a practice that developed not to put fish and meat together on the same plate, and it's invoked because of Chamira Sakanta Me'Yusura. There was a situation in the Talmud where the two were placed together and someone got sick, and therefore they declared no mixing fish and meat together because of that danger. And that's something that, it's always very interesting to see that, sometimes, at a kiddush, someone will have their cholent and their tuna fish on the same plate. Now, I don't think they really tried to eat them together. I don't think they go together, but it's kind of interesting. To this day, that a warning light goes off in my head if I see that being done, because it's become so ingrained in the Jewish tradition. Don't mix the fish and the meat, even though there's no prohibition, there's no violation, there's no isur, but there is sakana. There has been that danger. And even though the danger is no longer there, it's still invoked as problematic. Bottom line is, to the letter of the law, you are allowed to mix the fish and the meat together. Again, I don't know about taste. If you put your, salami on top of the herring, I wouldn't imagine it's a very good taste sensation, but technically it's permissible. But this warning light goes off because we should be more careful about uncertain danger than with an uncertain prohibition. And that now then, with such a strong concern for health and safety and well-being, and such a strong directive that of someone who's taking risks is acting against Jewish tradition, Jewish law, should be lashed by the sages for these crazy, dangerous ideas. Well, what about the fact that just crossing the street can be dangerous? Right? How do we balance that with the fact that there are all sorts of things that are dangerous? Right? It's sometimes interesting when people will run the numbers as to which activities are dangerous and which activities are less dangerous. In terms of it's sometimes, more likely that you'll, get, what are the odds of, injuring oneself in this type of a situation, or what are the odds of not coming back after going down thousands of feet in a submersible? And how do we square the circle with regards to don't take risks, but we have to live our lives? And in particular, this emerges from a very foundational, it seems like an obvious question in Jewish law. We know that there is a rule that when 4 people, the Talmud says, have responsibility to give thanks, and this is the idea of the Gomel blessing. And it is so someone who recovers from illness, someone who crosses the desert, someone who crosses the sea, and someone who gets out of jail. Now, person getting sick and then getting better or being put in jail, again, when released, they're sometimes out of one's control. But if you're crossing the sea or crossing the desert, if these are dangerous enough to require giving thanks once you completed them, why do it in the first place? It's kind of, there's a responsibility to give thanks because these situations are dangerous. If they're dangerous, then how could you do it in the first place? How can you, if air travel, if it's dangerous, then you shouldn't do it. So why that if you did it and you shouldn't have done it, you give thanks afterwards? So maybe it's because you always give thanks for the goodness that God does. But this idea of how can you, if it's dangerous, how can you do it in the first place is asked by many of the commentaries. And one is Rabbi Malkiel Tzvi Tannenbaum and Divrei Malkiel, one of the authorities, halachic authorities, asks this question, and basically, introduce us to the fact that yes, it's dangerous, but you still have to keep living. So what is he saying? Source number 7. We find, after all, that sea travelers are required to thank God upon the safe completion of their voyage, because danger is common when traveling by sea, yet it's certainly permissible to sail at sea. And this is not considered knowingly killing oneself or harming oneself. We thus see that it is permissible to place oneself in a situation of possible danger as long as there's only a remote risk. And then he says, elaboration is needed to explain the limits in regard to this, but time does not allow. So there's a lot we have to discuss here. The Divrei Malkiel says, but I can't do it right now. Right? This is, so he's writing, end of the 19th, early 20th century. Right? There's a lot here, but it requires elaboration. So what's starting to emerge is that you can't take risks, you can't live dangerously. But what is considered danger is going to depend on factors. Maybe it's whether everyone does it or only some people do it, or what are what are the odds, or especially is it being done or not? So that's something that Rabbi Aryeh Leib Lifshitz, the Shem Aryeh, says. We're talking about a similar time frame when this discussion is taking place. In Divrei Malkiel and the Shem Aryeh, you should know that when it comes to things that entail danger, nevertheless, if it is something that is the way of the world and a necessity, there is no concern. Right? So you have to get out of your house. You have to get to work. You have to cross the street. Everyone does it. You can do it too. It's kind of, is this, as he says, the way of the world is something that's done, or if it's a necessity, like the only way for you to get from point A to point B for business is to cross the sea, across the desert, then it's something that would be allowed.
Having an elective surgery, these are.
Well, correct. So this is a type of question that goes into elective surgery. There are a couple. The elective surgery has another issue of the fact that you're not supposed to injure oneself. That's a separate from being careful. So, there too, it's, if, for example, comes up as, you're injuring yourself, but it's for hopefully a higher purpose, or for a legitimate or a necessary purpose. It comes up also this idea of chavala, it's called, wounding. In particular, let's say there's a doctor treating their parent. It says makeh aviv imo mot yumat. If you hit your parents, you get the death penalty. So hitting is understood in the Talmud as drawing blood. So, can a doctor or a dentist practice on their parents is an interesting question. And there it's the end justifying the means is something that comes up, and that's a similar idea here as well. This idea of the ends having to justify the means. And so is there necessity? Is it something that people are doing? Maybe if it doesn't raise eyebrows, that's, going skiing. I wouldn't want to do it because it's dangerous. Also not very good at it. I think I've mentioned before, I'm very good at skiing. I'm terrible at stopping. So in this situation, but people go skiing. But do people go down and visit the Titanic? Well, we'll have to see. But so that one aspect is then justifying the means. And there's another corollary to this justification for dangerous behavior. The Talmud invokes a verse from the book of Psalms that we say in the Hallel. Shomer pitayim Hashem. God protects the fools. The idea that God looks out for people. And so this has to do with the source number 9. It's invoked in Masechet Shabbat and elsewhere. Since the multitudes have already become accustomed to letting blood, the verse, the Lord protects the simple-hearted, applies in this case. So whole discussion, should you put yourself in danger right before Shabbos? Is it wise to do this right before Shabbos? And so since people are doing it, God protects the simple-hearted. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Wasserman, right, who was murdered in the Kovna ghetto, in his Kovei Shiurim, source number 10, we must explain that a person is not required to refrain from ordinary conduct, and hence one is considered unable to protect himself. He is then protected by God. But one is able to be careful. He is not in the category of the foolhardy. If he does not protect himself, he puts his life at risk and will not be protected by God. Like what kind of protection is being afforded by Shomer Pesayim Hashem? And so Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says that it's ordinary conduct. What's considered ordinary conduct? Well, that can depend on the time and the place. This verse, for example, has been invoked. Rosie, you talked before about elective surgery. This verse has been invoked for things like that. It's also been invoked very often with discussion about smoking, and smoking being prohibited or not. Certainly, as the dangers of smoking first came out, there were those who said, well, everyone's smoking. So many people are smoking, Shomer Pesayim Hashem. God judges the fools. As it became more and more evident that there's really a direct correlation between smoking and health concerns, it's harder to say God protects the fools because you're no longer foolish. Everybody has the information. However, at the same time, Rabbi Yochanan Wasserman says that it's ordinary conduct. Right? If you have tobacco, it's such a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people are buying it, is smoking ordinary conduct or not? Now, very often amongst halachic authorities, the language relating to smoking has become much more harsh and strict. More and more rabbis, some of the prominent poskim, have all come out against smoking. Not sure it has tamped down on the number of their adherents who are smoking. And on some level, they could invoke Rabbi Chanan Wasserman as saying it's ordinary conduct. Ordinary conduct, people are doing it. There's some Shomer Petayim Hashem involved, even though the rabbinic leadership is saying if it's unhealthy, if it's dangerous, don't do it. And we see here the texts give us certain guidance as to what we shouldn't be doing, dangerous activity. At the same time, since the specific nature of that activity could be different, and some people do it while others don't, it makes it harder for a prohibition to take root amongst the masses. Even though the rabbis are using really language that these are prohibited activities, right? Smoking is just as bad as eating treif. plenty of people who are careful about kosher are not careful about smoking. And you can say that there's certain type of addictive aspect of it. So there's certainly, you would certainly find very much, across the board, don't start smoking and trying to quit smoking are the way to go from a halachic perspective. But here you have something that's dangerous, objectively dangerous, that has a certain protection from Jewish law that everyone's doing. It's ordinary behavior, and so therefore there's still something to hold on to. And again, smoking may be unique because of the addictive nature. It's hard to quit, but it seems that dangerous behaviors aren't in and of themselves going to be automatically disqualified if these are things that people are doing. And so when it comes to going down to visit the Titanic, source number 11, yes, Titanic tourism is a thing and it's dangerous. So people are doing it and it's dangerous. This was a report in CNN. Only a handful of people have seen the Titanic's wreckage in person because precious few have what it takes to visit. Financial resources, access to experts, and a willingness to accept the significant safety risk. But for those willing to shell out, tourism and research company OceanGate Expeditions offered 8-day missions to explore Titanic more than 13,000 feet below the ocean surface. Right, once in a lifetime experience costs $250,000 per person, according to the company's website. Here we're going to see the interplay between danger and ostentatious spending. It's dangerous and it's $250,000 a person. But it's dangerous and the risks are there and the people were aware of the risks. We saw in the earlier article already 5 years ago, it came out. So is this behavior that is entrenched enough or desired enough to be considered ordinary behavior? Source number 13. Film director James Cameron said Thursday he's worried that the Titan submersible's implosion will have a negative impact on citizen explorers. These are serious people with serious curiosity, willing to put serious money down to go to these interesting places. I don't want to discourage that, but I think it's almost now a lesson. The takeaway is make sure if you're going to go into a vehicle, whether it's an aircraft or surface craft or submersible, that it's been through certifying agencies. And so maybe the difference, or maybe the way it's understood to be ordinary behavior or not, is that whatever dangers there are, even if they are significant, have been vetted and reviewed by those certifying agencies that say that this type of submersible meets safety standards. And I think that one of the things in this recent case with the Titan was that it wasn't regulated. They left from Canadian waters, not American waters for that reason. There are whole sorts of complicating features about it. So it wasn't only dangerous, but it didn't have any types of reassurances that may have made it more ordinary behavior. So we have to stay safe. We can't engage in danger. There's certain, there aren't necessarily specific conditions in guidance for what's absolutely dangerous. And if people are doing it or willing to do it, or maybe there's some guidance from regulating industries as to, this is like you get on the elevator is safe up to 2,000 pounds. Okay, so you can take an elevator. If you have 2,100 pounds on it, maybe you shouldn't take an elevator. Right? The idea that safety guidance may play a role, and it may also be something that could guide what's considered unnecessary risk or dangerous behavior. Questions on the Titanic before we talk about the exorbitant price tags of certain things?
There was
Rabbi,
nothing to see.
go ahead.
There was nothing to see. Everyone knew there's nothing down there. And in addition, I saw the first film in 1960 called A Night to Remember. And it wasn't prepared. It was, documented that it didn't have, practice voyages. And it was, they would.
Well, look, that could be about taking Titanic in the first place. Titanic was an unsinkable ship. I don't think people were thinking about that. Now the question is, can you go down and visit it? It would seem to certainly be, from a dangerous perspective, lacking some of the features that would mitigate this against being a violation of Ushmarta Mod L'Nafsho Seichel. But if more people were doing it and had certain more reassurances as to the nature of the submersible they were going down in, and there was some oversight, that may move it away from prohibited danger activity. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the smartest thing to do or the most efficient way of spending $250,000.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
you talked previously about food, and I just want to mention a personal predilection. I don't believe eating meat is certainly not good for the environment. And I don't believe it's good for one's health either, period.
All right. So look, you can talk about a lot of behavior. What's the level of risk? But I would say, let's say someone says eating meat is dangerous. Well, but however, at the same time, it's ordinary behavior, and the health risks are not as always directly correlated, the same way to the level, like, let's say smoking being bad for your health is. And certainly more people are doing it more proactively. Obviously, times will change and different studies will show, and that might mitigate how we look at it. But if you want to use meat as an example, there's far less danger that's readily in information evidence that meat is as dangerous as smoking. So you're not going to have it prohibited. But again, a lot of these things, sometimes it's moderation. Is smoking one cigarette, every 6 years a violation? Is eating meat once a week a violation? There's a spectrum, and that highlights, it's less about specific activities at which we can prohibit, but we can look at certain types of activities and the variables surrounding them, which can be prohibited. Like, again, using the submersible. Would it be prohibited to explore? Well, people are interested in exploring, but you have to take right precautions. You have to mitigate around it to turn this into a behavior that people would accept. There are all types of behavior. Like, go back to something less, more widely done. Like we said before, skiing. People ski. Is it dangerous? Yes. Does that mean it should be prohibited? It would seem from the various, the conditions surrounding it, people do it. It's regulated. There's safety instructions. There, same thing of flying. Same thing of taking a boat ride. These are things that are about numbers and about conditions surrounding it and about mitigating danger. But you're correct. There's no way to necessarily. It's difficult for halacha to be specific as to when is it definitely dangerous, right? Go back to the Rama. If someone says that they're going to do something dangerous, the rabbi should stop them and lash them and beat this idea out of their head. So that type of instruction in and of itself tells us that it's difficult to be very specific as to identify things that absolutely these behaviors are no good. And I think that's a good transition into the fact that how much money to spend. Because Judaism is not does not encourage, that doesn't see more value in spending less. Judaism sees value in using one's money effectively. Everything should be within the service of God. We're supposed to do what we can. For example, look, with regards to wealth, Pirkei Avos sees wealth as a reward. Rabbi Jonathan said, whoever fulfills the Torah out of poverty will end up fulfilling it out of wealth. Whoever discards Torah out of a state of wealth, you'll be able to discard it out of a state of poverty. Right? There's a certain amount of recognizing that if a person will be rewarded for their good behavior, and that they should be able to use that wealth for good purposes. And so when it comes to how much to spend on things, it's obviously all should be just similar that we say in other respects, right? You should be doing things for the sake of heaven. And sometimes what makes it more complicated in the Orthodox community in particular, right? This is something that has been discussed in many different ways. Has to do with the fact that in the Orthodox community, you have a phenomenon of different social classes living in proximity because of the need for the shared religious life of the community. Right, so you'll have wealthier people and poorer people davening the same Indian because they live near the same shul. Right, sometimes there's certain neighborhoods that you have to have a certain threshold to be able to afford the house there. But as was mentioned on this one podcast by an author named David Lichtenstein, in the same Indian you could have a person who's living on $75,000 a year, and someone who's spending $75,000 a year for a winter vacation for the family. And that davening elbow to elbow or living next door to each other, that type of a phenomenon you don't generally see in the non-Jewish world, where the classes are sometimes separated based on those who send their kids to public school or private school, those who live more urban or those who live more suburban. And this is something that the Jewish tradition has been sensitive towards. It doesn't say don't spend your money. It doesn't say live beyond your means, but it does say they're cognizant. So look at source number 15 from Moed Katan 27. Our rabbis taught formerly they would bring food to the house of mourners in the following manner: to the rich in baskets of gold and silver, to the poor in wicker baskets made of peeled willows. And the poor people were ashamed. The sages therefore instituted that all should be provided with food in wicker baskets made out of peeled willows out of deference to the poor. Right? They would spend more money, and the rich people had more money to pay for it afterwards. They brought them into something fancier. That was insulting. Our rabbis taught formerly they would provide drinks to the house of the mourners in the following manner: to the rich in white glass, which was very expensive, to the poor in colored glass. And the poor people were ashamed. Sages therefore instituted all should be provided with drinks in colored glass out of deference to the poor. A couple other examples there as well. It mentioned Moed Katan. So the idea was we're sensitive that if it's a communal endeavor, right, you don't perform it more nicely and make it more fancy just because of socioeconomic status. You don't want people to feel that they're left out and don't have the same access to the way the community treats them. Doesn't tell us about what about the people of means. Obviously, people who have more means can spend more on things. People who have less. But we're sensitive to the fact that the way the community looks at the individuals, it doesn't have a two-tier system of poor and rich. It's meant to be that everyone who is served by the community should be served in an equal way. And I think that part of this relates to what we saw last time, this idea of tikkun olam, right there, the source number 16. We saw this last time, that the captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value, for the betterment of the world. And that has a specific reason, rationale that we spoke about. But we don't want there to be a two-tier system. In that respect, we were talking about that. We don't want maybe even if it's technically permissible to sell organs for donation, you don't want to create a scenario that only the rich have access to the organs based on the laws of supply and demand. You have to be careful. When you think tikkun olam, for the betterment of the world, for the well-being of the community, you want to be concerned about these things. And wealth is one of those things that we should be concerned about. A couple of interesting reactions to wealth. One is Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim Lunshitz. He's the author of the Kli Yakar, 17th century. And it's talking about, we're going to read it, not this coming Shabbos, but next Shabbos, about the direction that the Jewish nation, it says that the Jewish nation became too heavy, too big in the desert, and they had to turn towards the north. And the idea was that the north was where Esav was, and the idea was that they would encounter Esav, and there's Esav is complicated when it comes to Esav is very sensitive to Jewish wealth. Why? Because Yaakov got the bracha of the wealth, and Esav didn't. And Esav thinks everything is stolen from him because it should have belonged to him. And so Rabbi Lunshitz, the Kli Yakar, says the idea was that the Jew will be encountering Esav, metaphorically. You have to be sensitive to the fact that when the non-Jew sees the Jew having wealth, the non-Jew's gonna the antenna will go up. They'll be paying special attention to Jewish wealth. Maybe kind of a foreshadowing of the anti-Semitic argument: the Jews control the banks. And you have to be careful when you go in that direction, right? The English doesn't have all of it, but the idea of hiding means that if a Jewish person in exile finds some small amount of success, he should hide it from the people of Esav, because there's no nation which is more jealous of Israel than Esav. Because in their opinion, everything that Israel has is stolen from Esav, because Jacob, our forefather, took the blessings from Esav. So the idea that the Torah is mentioning about how the Jewish people traveled was to always be sensitive, not to flaunt the wealth. And then in the Hebrew, if you want, it's a third line down the middle, Rabbi Lunshitz, turns this analysis to what he sees as happening in his time. He says, Jewish people are not acting this way. They're not being careful. They are flaunting their wealth. Because he says, anyone who wants to show himself in the nicest clothes and spends the money, and this can anger the nations around us. And he says that this practice is found throughout many of our people. And he says it causes a lot of trouble for the Jews. Those who are sensitive and intuitive should learn a lesson from this, to not flaunt Jewish wealth. And so it's one thing to have it and to use it, but you have to be wise in how to use it. And that's something that has something that has been on the minds of our spiritual leaders, for centuries already. It emerges straight from an analysis of that verse in Devarim. But it was something that the Kli Yakar accused the people in his generation, the 17th century, of not being careful about flaunting the wealth. So this idea of if you have it, don't flaunt it. But if you have it, there's nothing wrong with using it. But there is a concern about the direction this goes. And this was something that has in various occasions come up with regards to, should there be standards for what Jewish weddings should have and not have? Source number 18 has going back all over 50 years to rabbis from Bnei Brak making suggestions for what weddings should look like. And this has come up time and again in these communities. We're not going to go through all of it now. You can look at it. You should have a modest kiddush, and you should don't spend so much. You should only serve one course, et cetera, et cetera. What emerges to me when reading these things is that over 50 years, they've never really been implemented. There's never been the ability, even in that community, to follow these guidelines, because people want to celebrate according to their means. People want to celebrate in ways that bring joy to the family and celebrate. You think of Hasidic weddings, which have thousands and thousands of people. That's the Rebbe's wedding, so maybe it's excluded from these guidelines. But maybe there's something to be said for celebrating the way that works for a family and a community, that works for a family, their preferences. Some people have more, some people have less, but those who have more are spending more. Doesn't mean that they're not l'shem shamayim. And on some level, maybe this is also an industry. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. Source number 19. These events provide ongoing income for hundreds of families, from the producers and distributors of agricultural products to the caterers and the waiters. What need is there to cut off this economic branch that grows and develops day by day? May celebrations increase in Israel. It's good for everybody. It's good for the economy, and it's good for business. And he's writing in Israel, which is a Jewish economy and Jewish business. But you have to look at the total picture. It's not necessarily flaunting unnecessary displays of ostentation, but it's a way to celebrate, and it's a way to also keep the economy rolling. It gives people, it gives all the people listed and more a job. I think we probably think about that less here because we live in a non-Jewish society, and we're not always thinking about the religious benefits of contributing to that society. We don't always think about on some level in Israel, it's like a mitzvah to pay taxes because it's supporting a Jewish state. Here, we might not necessarily feel that way about what's around us. And the last source is Rav Lichtenstein, who talks about the complexity of I guess what some people call this affluenza, right? This idea it's a blessing, but it's also a challenge of having too much. And you're right, in recent years, one observes the Americans seen a terribly disturbing phenomenon, the spread of hedonistic values with a kind of glut kosher packaging. There was a time when the problem of hedonism for religious Jews didn't often arise, because even if you wanted to have the time of your life, there wasn't very much that you could do. The country clubs were all barred to Jews. There weren't many kosher restaurants. There were no kosher nightclubs, etc. The last decade or two, and he's writing, some 20 years ago and 30 years ago, a whole culture has developed geared towards frum Jews where the message is enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. And everything has a hechsher and a super hechsher. So he says, next paragraph, don't misunderstand me. I'm not opposed to people enjoying themselves to some extent. I'm not arguing for a totally ascetic approach to life. I don't live that way myself. And when I don't practice, I certainly am not going to preach. In a sense, I don't practice it because I don't really think that it's demanded, right? We're allowed to enjoy. The question is something else entirely. The question is not whether there is room in human life for a person to have a certain measure of pleasure. Rather, the question is, what is his basic perspective? How much does it involve himself in this? Does he see himself as basically born to enjoy or to work? To some extent, the feeling has permeated our world. The whole culture of enjoyment has begun to take hold. This is something which is recent, which with anyone who is a Ben Torah certainly should in no way identify or associate. The whole culture advocates that man is born for pleasure, but unfortunately has to work if he wants to enjoy. In contrast, we know Adam la'amel yulad, man is born to do labor. So for Lichtenstein, it's not about dollars and cents what is spent, but it's about the perspective that a person clings to. And you can have a perspective that a person is born to work, and it's not all about to have pleasure and spend and enjoy, if that's what one is blessed to. At the same time, the danger, the pitfall of spending too much, is in terms of trying to maintain a community that has more cohesion, and where you have haves and have-nots. And it was just interesting reading and listening to some of the ways that people were addressing the subject, because at least the ones that I listened to, there was a lot of talking around the subject. There's very little specific guidance that can be given. Because I think, like Rabbi Lichtenstein says, it's a matter of midos, it's a matter of values. And in many ways, midos are not something we can tell you to think a certain thing or tell you to behave a certain way or have a certain mindset. It's about developing that oneself and then living and expressing it through one's actions, that type of a mindset. So for the $175 hamburger, you want to spend a lot of money on a kosher restaurant, that's great. The one thing that did stand out with regard to this from the original article in source number 2 was the fact that people want to be seen. We're living in a world where everybody wants to be different. Everyone wants to be seen, to feel special. To be seen, that's not necessarily, coming from a very good motivation. We believe in tzniut, we believe in modesty. The idea that the owner of the restaurant thinks that this will be more of a social media type of a menu item, that you're going to want to take your picture and post it on Instagram or something like that. Now that, I think is moving away. Spending that much money on a hamburger, can't imagine doing it. But certainly that it's because of wanting to be seen. We're entering into the realm of values, not so much in how much we're overpaying. And a lot of the discussion about how much to pay or when is it spending too much, generally the concerns are about midos, or about community, and about cohesion, and about everyone being able to participate, everyone having enough. The idea that, look, thank God people who may be spending more, hopefully are giving more tzedakah as well, especially if motivated l'shem shamayim. So it's an area that's more about midos and less about halacha. And in this case, $175 hamburger, it's kosher. I think it's glatt kosher. It's hormone-free and everything like that. So maybe it's a little bit healthier. But if it's about wanting to draw more attention to oneself, that's something that's lacking a little bit in Jewish values. So I think a common denominator between an acceptable risk and conspicuous consumption has to do more than specific strict halakhic guidance, and more to do with a spectrum, both in terms of what's dangerous and in terms of what's appropriate, that ultimately a person will determine on their own, and it's hopefully coming from appropriate Jewish values and a mindset of wanting to do more, to do good, to live more in line with what God demands of us. So be careful when you go exploring, and bon appetit.
When you consider